Review copy provided by Activision. I've been told to say that. Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today it is finally time for us to review Spyro Reignited Trilogy on the Nintendo Switch. This review was once again originally written by me, so I get to take all the credit. And all the flack. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. Remakes and remastered are one of those things that feel ironically modern, and whilst they've had a place in the industry longer than some people think, there's no doubt that companies are seeing dollar signs in their eyes when they look back at older, successful franchises. Bleeding us nerds dry for all our nostalgia is a safe and reliable business practice, but hey, we get to play our old favourite games in a new way, so it's not like we don't get anything out of the arrangement. One of the more recent entries into this hallowed remastered Hall of Gubbins is Spyro Reignited Trilogy, a complete remake of the first 3 games that made Spyro what he was until Toys to Life became more profitable. It's been out on other systems for a good while now, and it was announced for Switch with very little fanfare, but now it's here. We're going to delve into how it plays, runs, jumps, and flies, because that's what a review do. If you're unfamiliar with our purple dragon dude, Spyro is a dragon. He runs fast and collects an awful lot of treasure, which always seems to take the form of perfectly cut gems. We're not sure what jewelers exist in the dragon world, but they're nothing if not diligent at their jobs, but seem to have an issue holding on to their work on the walk home. Gems are everywhere, and you're going to need to grab them, as well as other collectibles, in order to achieve victory. Spyro moves largely as you'd expect. He's a quadruped, so he doesn't quite have the acrobatic skill of a certain red plumber who will remain nameless, and his moveset is neither as varied as the Nintendo-branded moustache-owning individuals seen in the likes of Super Mario 64, nor as flowing. What he lacks in jumping, however, he makes up for in combat and his piddly little wings. Spyro can charge, yes, but more impressively, he can also breathe fire out of his gob and glide over longer distances than any Mario game, save Odyssey, would dare. Spyro controls in a somewhat stiff manner, meaning you may well be wrestling with the controls at times for what feels like no good reason. The developers have been shamelessly diligent in their recreation of the classic games, right down to the dated controls, and whilst this may put some people off, it's a very bold decision, and one that, in our eyes at least, just about pays off. If you're gonna remake a game, you need to do so with respect towards the originals, right down to the foibles. That's not to say there aren't delicious little quality of life improvements here and there, but they're definitely few and far between, and really only serve to show you the games as you remember them, which, if we're brutally honest, is gonna be through rose-tinted lenses, innit? The first game in the collection, simply called Spyro the Dragon, is understandably the simplest. Spyro has a basic moveset that never really evolves, and all you're tasked with doing is grabbing gems, smashing into enemies, and touching the statued forms of your dragon brethren, because Nasty Nork has emotional problems. You'll explore a handful of hub worlds that each house portals to standalone levels that can be completed to 100%, or you can just touch the bare minimum number of dragon statues to progress further. It's your choice. This entry has a very arcade feel to it. Each level feels separate from one another, the collectibles aren't as varied, and it's almost entirely platform and combat based. There are a few levels that task you with soaring around, trying to fly through rings and burn objects, and these are a welcome change of pace. The game is undeniably great fun, but you can see the growing pains in full force here. What's more, the interactions with the dragons you free can feel a tad stilted and out of place.
Thank you for releasing me.
They give you solid advice for sure, but it's fairly clear that this is based on a game from 20 years ago. A very good game, no doubt, and we had a blast playing through it, but the identity of the series hasn't been fully realized yet. Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, on the other hand, holds absolutely nothing back. The interactions between the characters, the worlds, and the writing feel completely modern through and through. This time around, Spyro gets thrown into the world of Avalar, inhabited by creatures that aren't dragons, and must help the locals defeat the evil Ripto, a misguided magician with a Napoleon complex and a less than savory view of dragons. To do this, you've got to collect a whole mess of orbs, which is handy because the inhabitants hand them out like sweets at every turn. You'll also need gems more than ever, as you'll need to exchange them with the questionably motivated money bags in order to gain new moves and access certain areas. The convenience continues as gems are colossally more common this time around, with you often left unable to move without slurping them up by the dozen. Almost as if the entire world was tailored to Spyro's exact requirements, if you can imagine such a thing. Spyro's moveset has advanced and evolved to the point where he has finally stopped being soluble and is now able to touch water without having an aneurysm. We still have hub worlds and individual levels to explore, but they're much bigger. This, combined with unique races of people in each land, makes the whole world feel much more alive rather than a series of just courses designed only to test your video game skills. So much about this game doesn't actually feel like a remake of an older game. Yes, there are random mini-games to complete for orbs such as ice hockey and realizing you can just ram into those turtles to save them from the soup pod rather than chasing them around with fire for 15 minutes, but so much else in this game hasn't aged a day. It's a true testament to the design and skill of Insomniac Games, and was easily the highlight of our time with this trilogy. Our final stop is Spyro Year of the Dragon, the difficult third album of the Spyro series. We follow a very similar formula this time as we did before, with hub worlds and standalone levels being the core gameplay loop, but instead of orbs this time we're on the hunt for orb-like casings that contain dragons, which for some reason are referred to as dragon eggs. As expected, Spyro's moveset evolves yet again, with him finally being able to force himself to the soil ground pound style, but the biggest change here is that Spyro is no longer the only star of the show. The past two games had a supporting cast, naturally, but you were limited to just one playable character, which is not the case in this third outing. As you enter certain levels this time, Spyro will immediately yield control to another character, and you're thrust into an entirely new way to play for that environment. Whilst this would be a nice change of pace in small doses, it happens really quite often, and although each secondary character isn't necessarily hard to control or understand, it upsets the flow a bit more than we'd like. With the first two games, the flying levels were a fun aside, almost a reward thanks to the high-octane speed and freedom of movement, but all the other characters in this game, and subsequently the levels in which you play them, feel a little bit stilted and just not as much fun. We didn't enjoy playing as these characters as much as we'd hoped, and all the while we were just honestly wishing we were playing as Spyro. He alone was good enough for the first two games after all, but that's not to say the rest of the game isn't fun. Oh no, sir! Every time we were playing as our favorite purple dragon, the world felt more alive than ever. Each level is expertly designed and is simply a riot to play through, and whilst we're sure the prospect of playing as multiple characters will have been seen as technically impressive and desirable back in the space year 2000, it's one thing that we feel has aged the least gracefully. But what about the overall experience? Well, you're getting three fairly meaty games in one here, and what's more, they're three pretty fantastic games that are beautifully presented. Spyro Reignited Trilogy is just out and out gorgeous, which makes us feel even more confused as to why there wasn't more of a fuss kicked up about this particular version. Shadows are crisp, the animation is insultingly smooth and emotive, and the art style will remain fresh for longer than the consoles it's been made for. Performance on Switch is pretty great as well, considering. Even with the busloads of anti-aliasing thrown in, it was sticking at 30 frames a second, or thereabouts, for a vast majority of our playthrough. We did encounter a few dips here and there, but it was nothing that spoiled our ability to play the game, or indeed enjoy it. There is an option to enable motion blur when playing in TV mode, which smooths out some of the nasties, such as a few of the dropped frames here and there, and does make the whole thing just appear unsurprisingly smoother because it's blurring some of the frames, but even so, we just felt better with it off. In fact, to be brutally honest with you, it made me feel a little bit nauseous, but that could just be me. Your mileage may vary. Please do try it with it on and with it off and see which you prefer. Spyro Reignited Trilogy is a wonderful love letter to a classic series, keeping everything that made the original games what they were, but slapping a fresh coat of paint on it for the HD era. There are a few creaking bones showing their age here and there, but only due to the developers' desire to keep things as accurate as possible. The Switch version looks absolutely stunning and runs surprisingly extremely well, so if you're looking for a classic 3D platforming experience, you should definitely give this a look in.